Welcome to class this week, students. This is English 102. I'm your instructor, Clayton Zollinger, and this is the lecture for Thursday, June 25th, 2026. So here are the things that we're going to be going over today. You'll see them all in Canvas, but I want to give you some more information and make sure that we understand all of the assignments and kind of how to go about doing all of them. So we'll talk about reflection number 2. We're going to talk about argument structure as it pertains to persuasive essays. We're going to talk about rhetorical appeals, how to use rhetorical appeals a little bit, how to frame our counter arguments, because we will need a counter argument in our problem solution essay, which is going to be essay number 2. Go over some context for reading and kind of look ahead at what's coming up. So the first thing to talk about, this is due on the 28th next week. So this is the next thing that you'll be working on. It isn't the assignment for it is actually in module 8. So make sure you look at that. But it's due on the 28th, I believe. So the first thing to do is take a look at reflection 1 and remind yourself what you wrote there, because you're going to want to kind of refer to your ideas and what you thought at the beginning of the course as you reflect on how things have changed now that you've done one major writing assignment. Maybe you've learned some things, maybe you've tried some different things in your writing. So go look back at what you said so that you can kind of see how you've grown and talk about that in your reflection, because that's a big part of what we're kind of looking for. What is your journey as a writer? How are you developing as a writer? And those are things that are kind of asked to reflect on. So step 1 is to take a look back at reflection number 1. Reflection number 2 is going to be very, very similar. So then you're going to want to take a look at the reflection 2 assignment. And I won't go over the exact requirements here. That is in Canvas. And that's very straightforward. I've noted it down below, but you don't have to answer everything completely. I have already highlighted for you kind of the main questions that I want you to focus on in your reflection essay 2. So read the assignment, and then you're going to want to actually write. That's going to be your third step here. So one kind of tip: there are 4 sections of the prompt in bold, with kind of questions about each of these different things. So my suggestion is, for formatting, just create like subheadings for each of those 4 sections, and then write your answers in each one of those sections. And that might be the easiest way for you to organize reflection essay 2. Then you want to pick whichever of the first 3 sections you want to start with. The last section you'll probably want to do at the end, because it's asking again for like an overall reflection of what do you think about writing, what is your theory about writing yourself now that you've done a little bit. So save that one for last, in my opinion, but pick whichever one of the first 3 is easiest to write about, that you have some ideas for, and that's the best place to start. You don't have to write these in order. That's why I just say put them in kind of four headings and write underneath them. You can do them in any order that they make sense to you. You can free write, you can make a bulleted list, you can compose a paragraph with a topic, sentence, evidence, and analysis. This isn't a formal essay, even though we call it a reflection, but it isn't really an essay. It doesn't have to be all complete sentences. You can make a bulleted list. If it's very detailed, that would be perfectly fine. So formatting is kind of whatever works for you to say what you want to say here. And I've already told you this last bullet point, like, don't worry about answering everything. There are quite a few questions. Just try to at least touch on the ones that I've highlighted, and then maybe a few others that are relevant and that you're thinking about. So let's move forward to talking about writing persuasive essays. Our first essay wasn't really persuasive. It was more explanatory, giving us some details about something that you're interested in, the field maybe you're going into, what you're studying in school, something along those lines. In our second essay, we'll look at the prompt a little bit later, but what we are doing here is thinking about what you've already written and the research that you've already done. You want to pick something related to kind of save yourself from having to do a bunch more research and a bunch more work. So in your research and writing your first essay, maybe you came across some issue in the field that is important and being debated right now. That might be a good topic to choose for essay number 2, which is what we call a problem solution essay. So you're going to find a problem in or some issue that's happening in the field that you wrote about, and propose a solution and convince the audience this is the best solution, here's what we should do, or this solution would actually work to combat this problem, whatever it is. So maybe you were writing an essay about the field of computer science, and so in essay 1. So you've got a bunch of resources there. Maybe you want to talk about AI, because that is the like budding field, the budding thing in the field of computer science right now. Everybody's talking about it, everybody's thinking about it. How should we use it? What are the drawbacks? What are the pros? What are the ethics of it? These are all important questions that are being talked about in that field. So maybe your problem can be, what do we do about AI? And you write an essay about that. Or you're writing about you're writing about the medical field, and the problem that you saw in your research is just how bad the burnout problem is for especially nurses. So nurse burnout, that's a big problem. Find a solution that you can suggest. What will fix that problem? So do this with whatever subject you wrote about in essay 1. Find the problem that you can identify from the research that you've already done. That way you don't have to start over on the research. With that out of the way, let's talk about actually like how do we write an argumentative essay where we're trying to persuade the audience of something. So one of the important things to think about is how are we structuring our arguments. We don't want them just kind of thrown willy-nilly across the page. That's usually not very effective. So here are some things we should be thinking about and doing to make our argumentative writing strong and persuasive. So argumentative writing and speaking in the U.S. is heavily influenced by classical rhetoric from ancient Greece via Rome and the medieval Renaissance Europe. You might have heard of Plato, Aristotle, these kinds of guys from ancient Greece. They came up with this field of rhetoric, of how do you actually persuade people to do something. And so there's lots of terminology and things that you maybe you know some of, but you don't know all of. You don't need to know all of the complicated terms from rhetoric, but it is often useful to kind of know what things they talk about in rhetoric, so that you can see how they've influenced fields. How do we use those terms today? What are the concepts you learned in like a Comm 101 class that have the same root in classical rhetoric that we have here in writing studies? So again, the essay that we're going to write is a problem solution essay, which is an argument and will include the same components as any argument, right? You're going to need a strong introduction, one that grabs the reader's attention, gives context to this problem. In rhetoric, they call that kairos. You got to say, here's the background information you need to know in order to see the problem that I'm going to show you is real, and then propose a solution to. And then it needs to make a claim. That's what we call the thesis, right? This is what the problem is, and here's what we're going to do, or here's what we should do in order to fix it. That's what your thesis should look like. Nurse burnout is a huge problem in the medical field right now, and blank is how we might combat it. Second, a body. That's the main part of the essay, right? Where the meat of the essay is. You need a body that proves the thesis with strong evidence and reasoning, which is where you're analyzing your sources, telling us what they mean, what we should take from those sources, why they prove what you're saying is right, or in this case, how do they prove that your solution is going to work? And it also should acknowledge and respond to objections. I mentioned this earlier. You're going to have a counter argument and a rebuttal in this sort of essay. You always want to find a strong argument against your position and pick it apart in your rebuttal. Say, this is why it's wrong. Maybe this is a good objection to what I'm saying. These are valid fears, but here's why my solution will still work, or why that's not a big enough reason not to do it, or here's the thing to mitigate that. Whatever you have to do to strike down that counter argument, that opposing voice, but you want to acknowledge it, and you want to do a good job of not like straw manning the other position and creating like a really flimsy argument that no one's making, just so it's easy for you to like fight it. All these things are important. We'll talk about them more as we get into the counter argument part. But that is a key part of the body. It's not just here's my proof that I'm right, but here's what other people are saying, and how do I deal with that. And of course, it's going to need a conclusion, just like any other essay, where you kind of bring everything together, sum it up, restate your thesis, so that there's no like unanswered questions, there's no ambiguity. The reader knows, okay, this was the argument. Here's all tied up for me nicely with a bow. I understand what this was about, and they can figure out what they think about your argument. You're going to want to use strategically rhetorical appeals throughout. And you're going to want to choose appeals that are appropriate to the rhetorical situation. So we talked about this in 101, so you've probably heard that term before, but if that you're like, what the heck is the rhetorical situation? That's simply, what is the argument that we're having? Who are we having it with? What's the situation around this issue? All those things will go into how should we approach this issue? What are the arguments that we should make? What are the arguments that are going to be appropriate and effective for the type of person I'm actually trying to convince? So we're going to talk about that next. But this is really important, to choose your strategies, your rhetorical strategies, your appeals carefully, so that they are appropriate for the situation and for the audience. So let's talk a little bit about what a problem and solution essay might look like. I've gone over, here are the parts of it. How do they actually look on the page? So this is kind of a little outline of what a persuasive essay might look like, with kind of boxes for different paragraphs. So you're always going to start with an introduction. That's going to be the first paragraph of your essay, usually. There are some exceptions, but for an English 102 class, especially if you aren't super confident in your writing yet, starting with your introduction is usually the best thing to do. Your introduction shouldn't go at the end, of course, right? That wouldn't make any sense. Sometimes this is optional, but oftentimes it's necessary if you are talking about some sort of complicated issue. Maybe it's like you're talking about a very specialized field of study. It's got its own jargon and its own it's not something that everyone might know off the top of their head. This might be something that they need a little bit of explanation for, just to kind of understand what it is you're talking about. So sometimes there's some background information that you need. This can go at the end of your introduction, or sometimes it goes in its own paragraph, kind of like the second paragraph of the essay, before you actually get to the body. But this is where you might define key terms. Maybe if you're writing a paper for a literature class, and you're like applying some sort of literary theory to a certain reading, this might be a paragraph where you explain what the reading that you're applying the theory to and what the theory is, right? You might use the vocabulary that you're going to be referring to over and over again throughout the essay there. So it's probably a paragraph. Sometimes it can be kind of folded into the introduction or into the problem section, but a really smart thing to do is to put it in its own paragraph. That usually, a lot of times, that's the best way to do it. And while I say you're defining key terms here, we don't want this to be just like a list of dictionary definitions, right? You want to do some explaining here. Since the common definitions of liberal and arts do not add up to liberal arts in the classical education sense of a broad, well-rounded intellectual foundation, maybe you have to explain those things to a non-academic audience, something like that. Then your first paragraph of your body is probably going to be identifying what the problem is. You're going to want to convince the audience that what you're saying is a problem is indeed a problem, and you'll want some evidence to show this is a problem. Maybe you're talking about climate change. Well, maybe you'll find some data to show what are the ill effects that we're facing right now in Idaho from climate change. Are like populations of certain animals much lower than they have been historically because of the ecological conditions of their habitat, or things like that. Whatever it is, whatever the problem is, again, I'll go back to nurse burnout. Maybe you have some facts and figures showing this is how bad a nurse burnout is. This is how many nurses are leaving, quitting the job and not coming back because they can't take it. It's too stressful, and you've got the data to show it, right? So you'll want one paragraph at least. Sometimes you'll have a couple paragraphs kind of defining the problem and really proving what it is. And so maybe it'll be more, especially if the audience isn't really familiar with the problem, or if most people might think maybe it's not a problem and you're saying, actually it is a problem. You might need some more than one paragraph there. But you have claims and evidence focusing on persuading the audience that the problem exists and needs to be solved. So this will be a standard PEAS paragraph. That's the model that I've used in my classes, which is point, evidence, analysis, summary, which is just, those are all the things that you should have in each of your body paragraphs. Some professors here also use MEAL. I'm not actually familiar with that one as much. I don't remember what they all stand for, but if that's what you learned in your 101 class and that's something that works for you, continue to use MEAL. I'll talk about PEAS in this class. And then sometimes this might kind of be your counter argument here in this part where you're telling them what the problem is. If they don't believe, if like the general audience isn't going to agree that that's the problem, then that might be a counter argument. Most people will say this isn't actually a problem. This is what they will say, but here's why they're wrong. Then you'll spend some paragraphs talking about the solution. This will vary. The number of paragraphs that you need will vary by your subject, and just kind of how many do you need in order to show that to explain your solution, and to show why your solution is going to be effective, or why we should choose your solution. Again, you'll use the standard PEAS or MEAL paragraphs to demonstrate what your solution is and why it's an effective solution to the problem. And then you should have a paragraph that's counter argument. Again, if you didn't already have that above, trying where you had to say this is actually a problem. Most people think it isn't. There's some stuff in the Canvas for you that's helpful in writing these counter arguments. So take a look at this resource, Tips for Writing Academic Persuasive Essays. It's in the modules. And then you'll finally have a conclusion, which is usually one paragraph, and looks like a conclusion to pretty much any essay in the English language. In kind of academic and professional writing, conclusions look very similar, no matter what the subject is or doesn't matter which style you're using, APA, MLA, Chicago. They all look very similar. So let's talk a little bit about the rhetorical appeals that I have mentioned. So in 101, you would have talked about logos, pathos, and ethos in pretty much any 101 class you took at CWI. So those should be pretty familiar to you, hopefully. But just as a quick reminder, logos, that Greek word has the same root as what we would say logic, right? It's where we use appeals to evidence and reasoning. facts, figures, logical, kind of making logical arguments. That's what we say logos is. So these are clear claims, evidence for claims, reasoning that shows how evidence supports the claims, really explaining it. That is appealing to logos. You're appealing to the logic, to the reasoning of your audience, and expecting them to believe you on logical grounds. This is a critical part of academic writing, and any good argument, really, though arguments can be effective without it, but for most of the time, most of them, you will probably need to say why this makes sense, why you're right, and do some explaining to the rational mind of your audience. The second one, pathos, is an appeal to emotion. This can establish the writer's voice or illustrate important ideas. If there's a big problem, you can make an appeal to say, look at the effects of this problem. They're so terrible, and kind of pull on the heartstrings of your audience a little bit to get them invested in, oh yes, this is a big problem and we need to fix it. Look at what's happening. And it's a good way to put a name to the numbers that you use. Sometimes you'll have good facts and figures, but they're kind of abstract. It's not really clear how they affect real people. But if you can show how they affect real people, that will get your audience on the emotional level to not just logically see what the numbers say, but see what that means in real people terms. This is kind of tricky and looks different depending on what you're saying. There's not one specific way this looks like, so I can't give you a very particular example right now. But be thinking about that when you've got a logical claim. A lot of times it's really good to also appeal to the emotion, to kind of double team your audience a little bit. Make it more effective. It's kind of like pathos is a catalyst for logos sometimes, and if you can get them on that emotional level and on the logical level, it's much more effective than either of those on their own. The third one that you probably should be familiar with is ethos, and that is an appeal to your character as the author or image or your values. And that's how you build trust with your reader. So this is sometimes saying why you know what you're talking about. Sometimes it's saying why your sources know what they're talking about. Appeal to their credentials. Oh yeah, I'm using this study by this scientist. He's got a PhD from this really, really intense school. He's the president of this large, important science organization. You can use those kinds of things to say this person knows what they're talking about and is someone of substance that we should actually listen to, as well as do that for yourself. Now, the one I've mentioned today earlier that you probably did not see in 101 is kairos, which is an appeal to timeliness, saying this is something that's going on right now and something we should be paying attention to and thinking about, right? That what your subject is timely, and that it's important to look at because it's timely. So usually this one's most obvious to use in the introduction. You're trying to get people on board with your argument. You want them to care a little bit as they go into reading your full essay. Show them why this issue is timely, why it's important for us to address right now. And it situates the essay in a current conversation, whether that's a generally known conversation, or if it's a conversation among experts that most people might not know of. But that's important and makes your issue seem important when it's currently being talked about. There are people writing things and doing studies or coming up with other solutions for this issue at the same time. That might make people be like, okay, yeah, a lot of people are saying this is an issue. Maybe this is an issue that we should be doing something about. So counter arguments. Again, see tips for writing academic persuasive essays. There's some resources in that module in the module 7. So there are a few types of counter arguments. um, which may or may not come from sources. We'll talk about that more as we go into next week. But just know that usually your counter arguments are going to come from sources, but sometimes they don't. So there are a few types. Could someone disagree with your claim? If so, why? Explain the opposing perspective in your own argument and then respond to it. Could someone draw a different conclusion from any of the facts or examples you present? If so, what is that different conclusion? And explain it and then respond to it. Why is that conclusion not the right one that people should take away from the data? Maybe it's understandable how they got there, but it's not the best way to read that data. It's not the most accurate picture to draw from it. Could a reader question any of your assumptions or claims? If so, what would they question? Would they question whether this is an issue that needs a solution at all? Would they question if you're saying the solution is for the state government to address this problem? Are they going to object to that? Say, no, the state government has no business fixing this problem. It should come from private citizens. What is it? What might they object to? And then how do you address that? How do you explain it away or tell them why they're wrong? Could a reader offer a different explanation of an issue? If so, what might their explanation be? Describe the different explanation and then respond to it. Is there any evidence out there that could weaken your position? If so, what is it? Cite this and then discuss the evidence and respond to it. And again, you want to, when you're doing these counter arguments, to have good, strong ones. You don't want to be fighting really weak arguments that doesn't actually do much to increase your reader's trust in you. But if you can successfully say, hey, there's this really good objection to what I'm saying, but here's why they're misguided, or here's why what I'm saying is still important, we should do it. However you deal with that. But if you do it well, it will make your audience trust you and really see, okay, yes, this person knows what they're talking about. They've shown me this issue. I really think this is a big issue that needs to be solved, and their solution, maybe it's not the one that everyone else is saying, but it is a good solution and we should do it. So then here in this slide here, I have some kind of like what responses to counter arguments might look like. We call these rebuttals. So if you agree with some of the counter argument perspectives, you can concede some of their points, like, I do agree that blah blah blah, but some of the points made by this person are valid, but you could then challenge the importance or usefulness of these points. However, this information does not apply because, however, they're incorrect because, whatever it is. If the counter-argument perspective is one that contains different evidence than you have in your argument, you can explain why a reader should not accept that evidence that the counter-arguer presents. If the counter-argument perspective is one that contains a different interpretation of evidence that you have in your own argument, you can explain why a reader should not accept that interpretation of evidence that your opponent, the counter-arguer, has given them. Or if the counter-argument is an acknowledgement of evidence that threatens or weakens your argument, you must explain why and how that evidence does not, in fact, invalidate your claim, right? So you're saying, I don't know, we say we've got the problem with the, I don't know, I'm just drawing blanks here. But if there's some evidence that goes against what you're saying, you have to describe that evidence. Here's what this evidence is. Here's what people say about that evidence, but here's why it actually is irrelevant, or here's why it doesn't disprove me. Here's how it fits in context of what I'm actually saying. Hopefully you get the picture. So there are some readings this week to kind of give you some context of what these kind of essays look like. So the first one is, why can't we stop unauthorized immigration? Because it works. This is linked in the modules. If you don't already have access to the New York Times, you don't need to pay for it. You do have access with your CWI account. I'm going to put these slides here in this module as well, so you can click on the slides and it will have a clickable link here for NYT or nytimes.com/passes, where you can connect your school account and get free access. It's not exactly a problem solution, but it's close. Marcelo Valdez, the author, identifies a problem, and then rather than proposing a specific solution, Valdez focuses on why the solutions haven't worked. So it's got a slightly different spin, but it is a very good is a very good like template for you to look at. How does an argument like this, where you're talking about a problem and proving your position on it with evidence, it looks like an essay should. It works like an essay like this should. So I think it's valid, even if it's a little bit different focus than what your assignment is. She has examples of solutions that have been tried and demonstrates why they were ineffective, and she has a discussion of why proposed solutions aren't actually implemented very much. So her thesis for this essay is that's because the solutions rarely address the root cause. Unauthorized immigration, for all obstacles America throws at it, remains a boon for countless U.S. employers and a reasonable bet for migrants who seek a better life. So its thesis is, this is why this hasn't been fixed. None of the solutions address the underlying problem, that migrant workers are useful for many employers who rely on cheap labor to make a profit and stay competitive in the market, and as well as even though there are dangers to illegal immigration to this country, for many people it does work out that it provides them that better life that they were looking for. They have they're getting regular pay. They get a lot of migrant heavy jobs in this state are like agricultural, and many of them come with lodging as part of the deal. You work for a farmer, and the farmer has a few trailer houses on part of his property, somewhere, and you get to live there during the season. So it does provide some things for migrants. So that's why it hasn't been effective. When you read it, you'll notice that there are bolded sentences that work as kind of like section headers. The introduction includes kairos. It situates in existing conversations, gives a brief history of the U.S. attempts at solutions for immigration, and it gives a thesis. The problem section shows the problem in light of global current context, explains its impact on the U.S. economy, and gives a history of U.S. immigration. Then the essay will talk about the solutions, but instead of, again, proposing a single solution that will work or a set of solutions that might work, it talks about why these haven't worked. It does the opposite. It includes political dynamics as another angle on why solutions don't work or aren't implemented. And then there's no real conclusion section. The conclusion is embedded in the solution section, probably starting with the political dynamic and this is the sentence there ending in, is one more reason the problem. So consider Valdez's purpose. Usually essays are proposing a solution when they spend so much time on a problem. Why doesn't Valdez? It's an interesting thing to think about with this essay. Why isn't there a solution proposed? So here is what's coming up next. Actually, this date right here is incorrect on Sunday. That's actually Tuesday. But tonight, your final draft for Essay 1 is due. Your reflection essay is due on the 28th, and the counter-argument initial post will be due that same day. And then next week, we're going to be working on an outline for Essay 2. Notice that Essay 2 is going to have a much quicker turnaround than Essay 1. We spend the longest time in this class working on Essay 1 to kind of get our footing. Now that we have it, especially with this 8-week course, the writing and due dates are going to be very quick and get here faster than you think they will. So make sure you're setting aside enough time to do writing, to do editing as we go through the process for essay number 2. If you have any questions, please make sure you send them to me in email. I have seen a few questions this week. I haven't seen a lot of students show up to my drop-in hours. I will be hosting those on Monday nights again, or I'm happy to meet outside of that time if you give me a heads up. We can schedule something that'll work for both of us. But yeah, please send me your questions. I'm happy to help. I'm happy to give you feedback on drafts or anything else like that. So you can message me in Canvas. My email is clainzollinger at cwi.edu. You should have that in the course materials. So please reach out to me if you need anything. Have a good rest of your week. Remember that Essay 1 final drafts are due tonight at 11:59. I will start grading those tomorrow. You should get feedback on Essay number 1 over the next week.